Good evening. My name is Carol Wickersham, and I have the honor of introducing our keynote lecturer. But before I do that, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have made this 12th year of the Duffy Community Partnerships such a success. Our community partners who serve as adjunct faculty out in the field, and I mean who are teachers with the rest of us, and we are so grateful for your expertise. Our faculty partners who work with me to help guide the students through their interdisciplinary paces, taking them where I could not. And of course, the students, who are the most important component of the Duffy Community Partnerships. They keep me on my toes, and they give so much to this community through their ideas and their hard work. This year, I also want to thank Rhiannon Decker, who served as my teaching assistant during the first semester, and also Lena Wright, who is a student colleague, and Jennifer Kodal, who has done so much for putting this evening together, and my colleagues in communications and development. Of course, I also want to thank the decision makers at this college who continue to support all the various ways that we do education in this place, in the classroom, beyond the classroom, and knitting those two ways of learning together. Together, we have become practitioners of the liberal arts. And most of all, I also want to thank Mr. Duffy, whose generosity, passion, and wisdom continue to invigorate our college. He was not able to be here tonight, but he actually will be checking up on us tomorrow. This evening is meant as a gesture of gratitude. Each year we have an opportunity during the colloquium to pause and think together about some central question, which is what animates the Duffy course. That question is, what makes a good society? Tonight we're going to hear some thoughts about the role that higher education can play in answering that question. Co-sponsoring tonight's lecture are a wide spectrum of different constituents from across this campus, as well as the community. The Liberal Arts and Practice Center, my wonderful colleagues there. The TRIO and Help Yourself programs. A special welcome to the high school students who are in the audience tonight. This talk is about your future. The Sociology and Education and Youth Studies Department, and hashtag Black Lives Matter, which is a group that has come together this year to address the concerns in this community and beyond. But let's cut to the chase. There's a lot I could say about Dr. Sara Goldrick Rab, but I'm going to keep this fairly short so that you can hear from her. Besides, you can all Google the rest of her many accomplishments and involvements later when you go home. I'm just going to set the stage a little bit. Dr. Goldrick Rab received her doctorate in sociology from Pennsylvania. Currently, she holds joint appointments in the Departments of Educational Policy, Studies, and Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she is also a senior scholar at the Center for the Advancement of Post-Secondary Education. In 2013, she became the founding director of a unique organization, the Wisconsin Hope Lab, which uses translational research. And what that means is it uses research. Research is a good thing. Counting things is important to inform policy and to get things done. The goal of this research is to minimize the barrier to college completion so that all students from all backgrounds might reach their full potential. As such, she is a scholar and an activist, a hybrid role, which does my practitioner, activist, scholar heart much good. She's written eloquently and passionately and convincingly about this. She has worked extensively with local, state, and national governments, testifying before Congress and helping to raise the level of discourse about the issues of education. And we know that the level of discourse needs to be raised. She's a prolific author with too many articles in both and popular press to begin to mention, including her most recent book published by Harvard Press, co-authored with Andrew Kelly, Reinventing Financial Aid, Charting a New Course to College Affordability. Again, I could go on, but what I want to do is introduce tonight's keynote lecture, Making College Free, the Case for an Effective, Sustainable Higher Education Financing. And I'd like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Goldrick Rab.
Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome. This is my first time at Beloit, which I realized as I walked around the campus, I'm a little horrified actually that I haven't made my way down here sooner. I've been living in Wisconsin for 11 years now. I'm a transplant from the East Coast. I'm raising 2 kids here. I live in the same neighborhood with one of your esteemed faculty, which is a privilege, and it's nice to be here. I'm going to be talking about Wisconsin higher education, and you're an important part of that. I am so gratified to see so many young people here. How many of you are current undergraduates? Wow, I think that might be as many as I've ever spoken in front of. And how many of you are not yet in college, but are sort of on your way? Wow, okay. Thank you so much for being here. I'm challenged by your presence, I want to tell you, because you're who I think about when I write. And for the undergraduates, you're whom I'm writing about. And so it's always something to have folks like that in the audience. And I hope that you will share your thoughts during the feedback. I'm sure you will. If you share your thoughts other ways, I want to encourage you all in case you tweet. Does anybody here tweet? God, very few tweeters. Okay, that's very small. Well, in case you do, there's a Twitter handle up there, and there is a conversation online, and that I can guarantee you will be happening now because this is apparently streaming, and there are a lot of people who talk about college affordability on Twitter. So if you're not on there, there is an active conversation, and I just encourage you to be part of it. So the title of my talk was introduced. You can see that clearly I'm interested in very large topics. Making college free is not a small thing to tackle, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I think it's important. The Hope Lab was introduced, and I want to tell you just very briefly, yes, I think research is important. Yes, I think numbers are important. I think you're going to see in a moment that I think stories are also very important, and qualitative research is also a part of the Wisconsin Hope Lab. But what we're really trying to do is make college affordable. Okay, we have one really clear goal here. That's the biggest barrier right now, students and the degrees that they want to attain, and I'm going to explain the various ways in which that's happening. And we're not just trying to sort of use research and do academic studies and put them into journals, all of which is very nice. We're trying to do the kind of research that communities can use to make the case for change, and that governments can use to try to figure out how that change could actually be paid for and what that would actually look like, right? Real and practical type stuff. And that's a big difference between what I used to have to do in my career and what the free tenure and the ability to kind of work with your students and your graduate students to try to change the world. So that's what I want to start by introducing you to Chloe. Okay, I'm not using folks' real names here tonight, but these are real people. This is not her real picture either. This is a little bit of sort of similar to what Chloe looks like. But I want to introduce you to someone that I met in the fall of 2008. And Chloe was born in a very small town in central Wisconsin, about 2 hours north of here. Its population is 2,000 people. And every year, her high school, to this day, graduates about 35 students. And she was one of them. And she was one of them in the spring of 2008. Her community grew up around a paper-making sawmill, and that was the economic hub of the town. And in the year that she entered college, the fall of 2008, the sawmill closed. And that means that the community lost their jobs. Chloe went to college at a Midwestern technical college, which I will not name because, again, these folks are still out there and still to pursue degrees, although Chloe's now in another part of the world. She went to college, I want to tell you, because she thought it was what was expected of her. Okay, so just to tell you a little about how she put it, she told me, I don't know what I was doing. I just knew that, okay, you get out of high school and you go to college. It just feels like you can't get a job, a decent job, I don't want to spend forever. It might be okay for some people, but it really wasn't for me, working at PetSmart or Kohl's or McDonald's or something like that for the rest of my life. I just couldn't stop doing that, she said, and I knew I had to get an education in order to prevent that from happening. Okay, those are sentiments I think many folks can identify with. There are folks in the hallway. Please come on in. There really are several seats down here in the front, and I want you to be in the room with us. Okay? Now, since Chloe was 5 years old, she wanted to be a veterinarian. Like many kids, and she was lucky enough to horse that her family had that she was able to ride and to learn to take care of when she was growing up. And so when she thought about going to college, what that meant for her was going to try to pursue an associate's degree at a technical college that would enable her to become a veterinarian. And the closest one was about 90 minutes away from her home. So she did have to move in order to do that. And that meant that she couldn't live at home during college, and she'd have to think about her finances. Okay? She got her financial aid package, and I'll tell you about in a moment what that looked like. And she knew she had to make a decision because she was short of the money that she needed. So Chloe sold her horse. Okay? And she thought about who would be a good, caretaker for her horse. There were several offers that offered her a little more money, but ultimately she settled for an offer of $1,000 for her horse. And it went to a home that she felt decent about, but she felt like she had to do that in order to pursue the rest of her life as a veterinarian. Her family earned $25,000, okay? And they made ends meet, but it was tight. And the college that she was attending, which is one of our public technical colleges in this state, the total cost per year, it might surprise you to learn, in that year, was $17,000 a year. It's rather substantial. She did what she was supposed to do. She filled out her financial aid paperwork. She FAFSA'd, okay? And she learned that she was eligible for the federal Pell Grant. But that was the only thing that she was eligible for at the technical college. She was too late when she enrolled to get the state grant because the state need-based grant runs out in the spring, and she applied a little too late for that. They didn't have any other grants for her. And that left her with what we call a net price. That's the price that she has to come up with, of $12,000, okay, to pay for college. Her expected family contribution is listed up there. It was $2,500. All right? So she has to think about ways on a family income of $25,000 a year of coming up with $12,000 that the federal system already determined she did not have. So what was her strategy? Like most students, she tries to think about what she can do to come up with those resources, and she went ahead and decided that the first thing she would do was she would live with someone else so that she could make ends meet. And so she was dating a guy at the time who also was going to go to the same school, and even though she really wasn't sure that this was really going somewhere, she decided to move in with him. So they lived together, and they decided not to live too close to the college because it was in an expensive part of the state. So they lived outside the area, and she commuted 45 minutes. So those were the first things that she did. Now, she also decided to try to get through college fast, so she registered for 5 classes, and that's pretty ambitious for college. In order to figure out for herself, she decided she should also accept federal loans. Okay? She accepted both the subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and those together amount to $5,500. You can see that she's still short. So she accepted 2 part-time jobs. She tried to find 1 full-time job, but a full-time job that works with 5 is very difficult to find. It doesn't offer you scheduling flexibility. So she took those 2 jobs, and she attempted during the fall of her first year of college to juggle those 2 jobs and her 5 classes. Unsurprisingly, she faced difficulty. She would get home late at night, about 11:30 at night, after working her second job. She'd go to sleep. She'd get up first thing in the morning, right? And her first class was at 7:30 a.m. She found herself doing what some of us call the head bob, right? And then she did the drool. First couple times that she thought this happened, she thought things would get better, but they didn't. She was exhausted, she was stressed, and in 2 of her classes, she wasn't doing so well. But she got to the end of the term, and she thought she was okay. She came back in January, having accepted loans for the second term, and she received a letter in the mail that indicated she'd been placed on academic probation, a term she'd not heard of before, and her financial aid was in jeopardy. She panicked. She didn't know what academic probation was. She didn't know how it would ever be possible to go to college without financial aid. She called her father in Florida. She got on a plane, and she left. She's never been back. That was the end of Chloe's story in college. I also want to tell you about Ian. Ian was a very positive kid growing up in a very tough situation. He's the youngest of 5 children, and he was raised in what he referred to as a ghetto-ish type of neighborhood with a lot of violence. Okay? Growing up, he went to Milwaukee Public Schools. His family struggled to pay the bills. He told us, sometimes we didn't have enough to eat, but it was just dealt with because we knew in the future there was going to be food. We're just going to have to work with what we have, but next week we know there's going to be food in the house. He's always looking to the future. We just divided it amongst ourselves so we didn't get greedy. We knew what we had to do because we've been in that situation so many times. We just divided it amongst ourselves and let each other know not to eat too much. Now, attending Milwaukee Public Schools was not easy for Ian or his siblings, but he knew he wanted more than that. He did not want in the future to have to wonder where the next meal was coming from. He had a vague sense that he wanted to go to college, but he wasn't sure he could make it. He told us, I felt in my heart I wanted to go, but I don't know for sure. So I kept feeling like, okay, all I'm fixing to do is get through high school, and that's it. I'm going to get out of high school and have a full-time job paying my mom's bills and everything. But in 2007, he actually did make it. He graduated from high school. He worked for a year to save money for college, and then he joined his older brothers and sisters in attending school. He told us, somehow I managed to stay more focused on my education, and that's why I'm here in college. I've been through the struggle, and it made me stronger. He did better than his siblings in many ways. While his brothers enrolled in a technical college and his sister went to a for-profit university, he made it into a public university where they granted bachelor's degrees, and that was what he wanted. He wanted a career, and his goal was a master's in business administration. This young man wanted an MBA. So when he went to college, his family, just like Chloe's, made $25,000 a year. Okay? The annual cost of attending the urban university nearest his home, the nearest public school, was $24,000 a year. His expected family contribution, which he obtained after filling out the FAFSA, was $500. That is what the federal government determined is all this young man could pay, $500. He received grants. In this case, he was on time for the Wisconsin grant, and the school had a little bit of help for him, so he received $9,500 a year, a lot more than Chloe did. And yet he was left with a net price of $14,000 a year. Okay. What's he supposed to do? Well, like Chloe, he took the loans. What choice did he have? He took the subsidized and the unsubsidized. He was not offered any work-study support because his university receives 10 times as many applications for work-study funds as they have actually available. Okay? So he needed to find off-campus work, but he also had a challenge. He had younger siblings. One of them was really struggling in high school. His mom needed his help taking care of him too. So he found a part-time job, many hours as he could to try to come up with at least $8,000 a year, and he spent a lot of that money caring for his family. The other major sacrifice that Ian made was he decided to live at home. What that meant for him was that he was part of whatever struggle was still happening at home. He was trying to get away and move up in the world, but he was still there when the high school friends of his younger brother were coming around. And people who he was trying, frankly, to try to get away from in some sense, they were still part of his daily existence. But he worked incredibly hard. He did not engage in extracurricular activities. He did not date. He made a point of this during interviews to explain to us that he was not dating because he had no time to date. And he focused on school. And somehow, he made it through the year. Now, he didn't eat every day, even while he was in college, despite that being the place where he was trying to get ahead. He struggled, but he made it through the first year. And luckily for him, in the second year, when he started to talk to the business school about what he wanted to do, somebody identified this young man, and they gave him more scholarship support. Okay? He made it. It took him 5 years instead of 4, but he graduated. He went on to earn his MBA, and that's a good thing because he now owes $35,000 in student loans. 50 years ago, federal and state policymakers set out to make life for people like Chloe and Ian easier. They wanted them to be able to get ahead of where they grew up. They wanted them to be able to do better than their families had done, and they wanted to offer them the pathway through college and university to make that happen. And they knew that income could get in the way. They knew that college costs would be a barrier. And so they created the Higher Education Act, and they created the federal financial aid system. And Senator Claiborne Pell, thinking in this manner, as you can see up here, that we should establish the right of every youngster, regardless of his family's financial circumstances, to obtain a post-secondary education, they created the Pell Grant. Okay? And the Pell Grant was supposed to make it possible for someone to go to college without facing income constraints from their families. That was the goal. We've gone very, very far away from that at this point. And we've done so at a time when quite clearly the path to the American dream runs only through higher education. There used to be alternatives to going to college. You used to be able to get ahead by finding a decent job working with your hands that paid a family livable wage. That's gone. And it disappeared at precisely the time when the only good option, college, became more expensive. So I do want to show you some. Okay. This first number would actually seem to indicate success. All right, so this is the fraction of people who recently finished high school over time who go on to college. And you can see the latest number that's on this chart is up in 2009, and that's the historic high. Okay, we send 70%, at least in 2009, we sent 70% of our recent high school graduates to college. If you think things are good in other countries and you hear things like, Germany makes college free, we should do that, you need to remember that they send perhaps 30%. Okay, so we do something remarkable in that a substantial fraction of our folks go on. Okay, but this is slowing down. And you can see here what's been happening since the recession. All right, maybe we could say that's a good thing. Maybe people are finding alternatives. Maybe they're foregoing and traveling Europe for a few years to see the world, right? We all know that's very unlikely. Right? What's happening to these folks is they're foregoing college for a barely minimum wage job, which has a lot of instability, and they're not going to be able to get ahead. Okay? We're starting to see people turn away from higher education when we spent all of this time trying to make it possible for them. We created this program, like I said, to alleviate income constraints, and what that partly means is we wanted to do it to diminish inequality. Right? What that means is we wanted the haves and the have-nots to at least be a little closer together. Well, what this chart shows you, if you look at the bottom line, these are folks who were born in 1961 and 1964, and this is their chances of finishing a bachelor's degree, okay, according to family income. So on the left is the lowest income quartile, and on the right, that's the top 25%. The line above it, the red line, are the people born decades later, people who are actually of my peer group, who were born between 1979 and 1982. All right? If things were working, we should see the low-income folks going and completing college at much higher rates than this. That's the first thing, right? Look at how very little change we've observed over time. The distance between these lines for low-income folks, 5 to 9. We spent trillions of dollars on federal financial aid in between those times, and we got a 4 percentage point change. However, this college financing system does seem to be working for somebody. The top 25% boosted their bachelor's degree attainment from 36% to 54%. In inequality, however, the other thing you need to do is do the math. Subtracting 5 from 36 back then, that's a 31 percentage point gap. and 9 from 54, which is a 45 percentage point. In other words, not only did we not succeed in really changing the chances that a person from a low-income family would get a college degree, but they've also ended up further behind than they were before we started this system. And we spent a lot of money doing it. Okay? A lot about college chances depending on hard work and talent. Take a good look at this chart. What this chart shows you is we're going to take the math scores of 8th grade children. They all took the same test. And we're going to array them here in terms of their chances, again, of completing a bachelor's degree or higher. If you look closely, what you see is that for the people living in the top 25% of the income distribution in this country, their children who score the lowest on these tests have a higher chance of finishing a bachelor's degree than those of families from the bottom 25% of the income distribution who have highly talented children. What matters for higher education today is not merely hard work and talent, but clearly family income. I could make the same chart, by the way, for the chances of being in the University of Wisconsin system according to ACT scores and income in the state. It would look very, very similar. So one of the ways that this was supposed to work with the current financial aid system was that the federal government was going to provide the Pell Grant, and states were going to provide affordable public higher education, appropriating money for it. Okay? And what this chart shows is what's happened in this state between 1961 and 2014 in terms of the share per $1,000 of income, so per family income of $1,000, how much money the state is actually spending on higher education. And what you can see is, going up to the time period in which we created the Pell program, okay, when the federal government created the Pell program, Wisconsin was putting in almost, say, about $15 per $1,000 of income in the state. And this is what's happened since. Okay, very soon, if the trend is putting in nothing towards the cost of college, and the students are the ones who can feel that. But most importantly, what this signals is that the federal government during this time keeps putting more and more in, and the states have effectively been doing less and less. Okay? So what happened to financial aid as well, right? So when college costs go up, we expect that grant aid should go up. Well, we spent more, that's for sure, and I want you to really get that message. We spent a lot more money. It's not as if we stopped spending money on federal financial aid, okay? Across the system, we're spending $150 billion a year right now. That is not small, okay? Quite substantial. And I want you to know, if you aren't familiar with DC politics, when you spend serious money like that, people raise serious questions, right? And it becomes of increasing numbers of questions. So partly because of the chart that I just showed you, the divestment, what we would call the divestment of the state from higher education, students now are paying a greater and greater fraction of the costs of the education, right? So the money that comes for undergraduate education, the way we pay for actually educating you, usually comes from 2 sources. In some cases at schools like these, it might come from 3 sources, but usually it comes partly from the state and partly from the student, okay? And here, and in some other cases, you'll have a contribution from an endowment, right, which is some additional private funds can contribute. In this case, this is the fraction of the total, right? 100% is the total amount of money that you need. You can see the fraction that's being paid by students rising and rising and rising. Okay, and that's one of the reasons that we keep feeling like college costs so much, is because the states withdrew their support. And here's what happened to the Pell as a result of that. The Pell Grant, when it was created, was supposed to cover okay? Approximately 75 to 80%. In fact, the goal was for it to cover 100% of the cost of attending a public four-year college. That's what the rhetoric was. The Pell Grant would make college free if you want to go to a public four-year institution. If you want to go to a private institution, it will still cover a reasonable amount of the cost, but really you should be able to go to a public four-year. Over time, the size of the grant has grown. It's not as if they're not providing, like I keep saying, it's not as if they're not providing money. And here in the blue line, you can see the size of the maximum Pell Grant, and it goes from about $1,500 a year, right, to well over $5,000 a year today. So again, you get a bigger grant. What you're seeing, though, in the yellow line is that it buys less than it used to, right? $5 20 years ago, you get the basic gist that it doesn't go as far. What this means is it used to cover about 7% of that total cost, and today it covers barely a third. So $1,000 Pell Grant buys you about a third of the actual cost of attending college. All right. So Chloe and Ian are not alone. This is a chart that shows you what it costs to attend a public two-year school according to your family income, and this is what it costs to attend a public four-year school, this is the national average, according to your family income. So of course, people who earn more money pay more to go to college. But as a percentage of their actual income, they pay less. Right? So we distribute more financial aid to low-income people, and that's why their price of a two-year college in the United States is on average $8,300 a year, compared to $14,000 for somebody who makes a lot of money. But if we divide that $8,300 into their average income of $21,000, we see that we're asking them to shell out 40% of their family income to pay for a two-year school. That's best case scenario. We can take loans, but again, that's going to be borrowed against the family income that they're going to eventually have to pay back, right? And if you look at the public four-year school, it's an even higher percentage. And in sharp contrast, we're still providing some financial aid to folks here, 22 and 16%. That may seem reasonable to you, but what you need to remember, for those of you that haven't had kids yet, the cost of childcare tends to amount to about 7 to 10% of family income. And people talk all the time about how expensive that is, right? So I actually want to say that one of the things I take away from this chart is that this is horrible for this group, but it's not good for these either, right? This is why we hear so much from the middle class, and it's for really good reason. The current financial aid system directs almost all of its attention right here. And yet asking a family making $81,000 a year to somehow come up with $20,000 to go to a public four-year school, that's not easy to do, okay? All right, so this is what leads you to the current situation where we actually ask the lowest income people in this country to borrow the most money to attend college. They don't end up borrowing the most. At the end of the day, they're not the ones with the $100,000 debt. People with $100,000 debts, $200,000 debts, disproportionately went to law school. Okay? They went to law school that I really want you to remember. They graduated. The people who are in crisis today because of student loans have very little debt. They have maybe $10,000, but they do not have a college degree. And they came from very low-income families. Trying to pay off even $2,000 or $3,000 a year when your family has no way to help you and you're unemployed and you didn't get a bachelor's degree, that's actually a rather substantial challenge. So these newspaper headlines that you're seeing about the $100,000 is actually, unfortunately, very misplaced. We do have a student debt crisis, but the crisis is about college unaffordability. And the crisis is about people not finishing college. All right. Now, I want to say a few words about college costs because I know that, you know, in popular discourse, y'all are familiar with tuition and fees, and you all are probably very familiar with worrying about if tuition's going to go up again. But since this is an opportunity to do a little bit of education, I want you to know that less than half of the total cost of attending college is actually in the tuition and fees. More than half is actually caught up in what we call the rest of it, the non-tuition and fees, the living expenses, the books and supplies. All right? These are a huge portion of the costs, and yet they get very little attention. Now, for most people, I understand here at Beloit, if you are an underclassman, you live on campus. But only about 13% of undergraduates today live on campus. Most undergraduates today live off campus, and they commute to school. And the current federal system lets the colleges and universities decide what that costs. So if you can imagine living in the city here instead of living on campus and trying to figure out what's the apartment going to cost me, right? What are my utilities going to cost me, et cetera. If you're on financial aid, you might be surprised to learn that the institution's already sort of decided for you about what it should cost. The accuracy of that estimate is really important. Because if they're wrong, you might not have enough money to live on. If you're not on financial aid, maybe that's not such a big deal because, maybe you're really talented and you can go write another scholarship application and you'll get some more money. But if you're on financial aid, they actually cap the amount of aid you're allowed to get, no matter how talented you are, at what they believe you can live on. Okay? So there are students out there who've won 6 and 7 different scholarships, and that's all fabulous. But the institution, let's say it costs $20,000 a year, they're not allowed to get scholarships that exceed $20,000 a year. They got to give it back. That number matters. But all the federal government says to the schools is, just come up with something reasonable. They can do surveys. They can go ask the landlords what it costs. Okay, I'm going to pause for a quick question. Yes? Yes, they can. It depends on the form. Yes, basically they do what's called displacement, okay? And you will find very talented students who are very frustrated that they have received all of these grants, but they can't get any more than the cost of attendance, even though you can't live at what they think you can live at. And I'm not talking here about students living large. We're not finding very many students living large, to be honest with you, especially not those on financial aid. We're talking ramen diet, even though ramen diet is not a good way to be, okay? And it's actually really unhealthy, and I would really advocate for you to do something else, okay? But what's happening right now is the colleges and universities are inaccurately assessing their costs. And they have really good reason to do it because nobody wants to look more expensive, right? Think about that from a marketing standpoint. If you could look cheaper, you would. The only thing you can easily manipulate is that cost. So we just did a study in which we assessed the accuracy of these costs by comparing them to what it actually costs to live in places all over the country using standardized data. And we found that 50% of colleges and universities are wrong by at least $3,000. And 30% of those are understating it. Okay, if they're overstating it, to take too many loans potentially, or they might be scaring you, right, with a cost that's actually a little too high. But I'll give you an example. In the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., I grew up right outside there. I focused in on this one. We looked to say, how much does it cost to live in the district as an off-campus student? The estimates in D.C. range from $12,000 for 9 months to $20,000. The actual cost of living in Washington, D.C. on a very meager budget is about $21,000. Try being at that school that thinks you can live on $12,000 a year. That's George Washington University, where I graduated from, one of the most expensive schools in the country. Their tuition is where they're making their money. And so they don't want to lower it. The only thing they can do is make it look a little less expensive by allocating students a little less money to actually live on. Okay? The other thing that these do is it assumes that if you live at home with your family, you're living for free. If you have any friends who've ever lived at home during college with their family, they're not living for free, okay? Families today are needing their children to pay rent, and they are, especially after they're 18 years old. They're needing help with food and utilities, and they're doing it. They're paying the mom's car repair, right? They are contributing because families are having trouble out there. And the federal financial aid system allows the schools to assume that you have no living expenses and therefore would not need financial aid for them. Okay. So I hope you can tell from some of the things that I just said that traditional students, sort of in the image of a student living on campus, going to school full-time, right, child-free, unmarried, that's the minority of students today. The vast majority have a very different situation. Okay, and the average age at which people are going to college is going up. And as this shows you, 75% of students are either commuting, juggling family, jobs, schools, okay? Almost 25% of college students today have a child. I think that's a great thing, to be honest with you. I think it's a triumph that people who've had kids can find their way back into higher education and on their way to trying and doing something for their kids. In fact, when we compare who do not have children to students with children, I think very unsurprisingly, we find that the student parents are extremely motivated and very good at making college sort of their priority. They have a real reason to do so for their kids. But the current aid system was set up for somebody who looks really, really different than today's undergraduate does. So this is having real consequences. If we just take a look in the last 20 years at the fraction of people who are not going to college at all, as I said before, and I kind of showed you this, I alluded to this, but this is broken out by income brackets, that number's going up. People are turning away from higher education, and importantly, it is low-income folks, but it's also moderate-income folks and middle-income folks, and even a few high-income folks. That might surprise you, but this is the top 25%. And if you know anything that's about what's happening to wages in this country, everybody outside the top 5% is having a hard time, right? So real wages are declining for large numbers of families, including those at the top, and they're having a hard time even paying for public school. The fraction of folks who are finishing college, we're not making strides on this. This is a major national priority. The president's been talking about it in several State of the Unions now, right? The need to help people who start college to finish college. We should see these bars going up, right? The bar on the left should be lower than the bar on the right, and in each case you can see that's not the case. This is the fraction of people finishing at a four-year school within 5 years of when they started college. Okay, and this is the fraction of people finishing at a community college, right, over time. And these are academically talented folks. In each of these cases, what I've done for you is to try to take the question of their academic preparation off the table and just focus in on those folks who were academically prepared. 100% completion rates among these folks, right? And we're not anywhere close to that, and things are going south. But we are doing something with our federal financial aid. In the name of choice, in the name of trying to make sure that people have as many options for where they go to college, we have continued to allow students to spend their financial aid anywhere, including at places that we can't guarantee are actually even safe. Places that we can't guarantee they have any chance of getting a degree at the end of the day. And we're still financing for-profit colleges and universities. So while we're thinking about the question of how to make college more affordable, we have to put on the table the multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry that has risen up to capture our federal financial aid dollars in the for-profit sector. Okay, think the University of Phoenix, think DeVry, think Capella. In the governor's current budget for the state of Wisconsin, the Educational Approval Board, which is a state agency overseeing the activities of these businesses in our state. It will be gone. That means it will be unregulated here. We will be fully and completely open for business. A good place for the for-profit colleges to begin to recruit our students. Okay. So I think that the other piece we have to talk about is what this means for the student experience. What does this mean for how students go to college? There's a lot of talk in the news about how college study anymore, and about how college students are lazy and about how college students are partying, and they love to highlight stories about all the wasteful things that college students are doing with their time. What they don't do is highlight 75% of undergraduates today are working. 75%. And while that used to be one little job at maybe 10 hours a week, it's not anymore. It's usually 20, sometimes 30, and it's hard to compile those hours gig. Right? Employers are spreading these things out, trying to avoid paying benefits and that sort of thing. So students often have to come up with 2 or 3 jobs. That's not uncommon anymore. The other thing that a lot of our Wisconsin students are doing that I've seen is they're working at night. And I'm talking late. So in a most recent survey that the Hope Lab did last fall, we asked students about the time of day that they're working, and we allowed them to indicate ranges of time. 25% of them were working between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. When your student's falling asleep in class, how often are you thinking that that's what they've been doing? Right? So this is really changing their experiences. We did a randomized experiment in which we gave students more grant aid for college. We lowered the cost for them, and we measured what they did with their time. They worked less. And that was a good sign, and they especially worked less off campus, and they worked less at night. But they didn't study more. We might have thought, well, they clearly aren't getting the message. They should be studying more. They should be working less. We should be educating them to focus on their studies. That would have been a mistake, because what we saw instead was an increased investment. And these were young folks. These were people between the ages of 18 and 20 when they started. These are not folks who were taking care of their own kids. They're taking care of their moms and their aunts and their cousins, right? And they're going back to do that. And that's a trade-off, being at college and missing out on family time, that we also don't typically think about our students making. The other thing that we're seeing that this is changing for undergraduates is the extent to which they are foregoing their basic needs. Okay, material hardship is something that we've talked about in K-12. We have a free and reduced price lunch program because we know it's important that children eat in order to learn. Right? In fact, when we had this federal policy called No Child Left Behind and teachers were pressured to try to raise test scores among their children, they found that giving them a peanut butter sandwich. Our test scores are not so good in higher education, but nobody's talking about the fact that we have students who are quite literally hungry because they can't afford to eat in the cafeteria. This is a big part of the work the Hope Lab has been doing lately, is to try to document housing and food insecurity. There are now questions on the FAFSA about homelessness. But you can't check the box on that FAFSA to indicate you're homeless unless you can prove it. If you've ever thought about what it takes to prove that you're homeless, you have to go to a shelter and get a letter. This is an underestimate of how big this problem is. Food banks, food pantry now. And yet we haven't started talking about a free and reduced price lunch program for higher education and what it means that we even need one. Many of these folks did not grow up generationally poor. In fact, some of them were not on free and reduced price lunch in elementary school. It's going to college that has made them poor. They are poor because they are trying to get ahead. They are trying to the possibility of poverty in their futures. And this is the situation that we've put them in. So what can we do? Meet Captain Optimism. My graduate student has created this. I'll be real curious to see in Q&A what you think of it. So Captain Optimism is a decent way of thinking about what the Hope Lab is about. These are really tough problems that could very easily discourage people, that do discourage people on a daily basis, that make them think that we're not going to get anywhere in this country and that we're going backwards. But the fact is, scientific studies have shown that if you can simply get up every day and keep hammering away at the problem, if you can be optimistic about it, you will make progress. I've known about many of these problems. They haven't been in the news for 11 years, but I've been after these for actually about 15 years. And believe me, sometimes you wonder, what are you doing? Because things are obviously going in the wrong direction. But we do have to think about solutions. And I do believe there really is a real opportunity here to change the narrative. And in fact, to make progress towards something that will prevent future generations from being in this situation, even if we ourselves can't get out of it right at this moment. So I think that an equitable and sustainable 21st century financing model has 3 really important characteristics. The first is we have to take as a given and as a starting point that people want to go to college, that lots of people want to go. It's very easy and tempting to think we should go backwards and send fewer people to school. Right? Just restrict access. That's what people say when they say, well, the real problem is too many people are going, and the people who are going really shouldn't be there. But I don't think this country was really created around the idea that some people should get educated and other people shouldn't. We've pushed pretty far past that at this point. The second thing is we have to acknowledge the real financial limitations that families face. We have to acknowledge what's happened to our economy. Right? And while people are working to fix that, I think that as if this is what people have in terms of their ability to pay going forward and not imagine a future in which people are subsidized. Okay? And the third thing is I think that we have to minimize risk and maximize impact. What we do right now is we put the most vulnerable people at risk. People who are just trying to get 2 years of college. These are people who are just on the knife's edge of poverty often. And they're trying to get themselves a little farther ahead. They're trying to get it to be a little bit easier. They're not aspiring for an MBA, or they're not even close to that. But we put them at the greatest risk right now. Okay. We also spend the most money on students who are already guaranteed to be able to graduate from college. Folks from really, wealthy, healthy families who they've had great high school education. We lavish them with resources right now. We provide merit scholarships. We devote all money to supporting them through college when, frankly, they would graduate even if we did nothing. They are so well through school. Okay? So what might free public higher education look like? Now, I think, pragmatically speaking, the place to start is with 2 years. Okay, if you take a look at the returns to degrees, the 2-year college degree does pay off. It pays off nicely relative to high school. In this state, it pays off really well. Our technical colleges have done a really good job with the training. Okay, and it's really well aligned with employers. I think that for a 2-year public option to appear, we have to have collective support. We don't have collective support for the current federal financial aid program. So many people don't get any help. Right? How many of you feel really friendly towards the Pell Grant when you've applied for the Pell Grant, but you don't get anything? When there's clearly need from the middle class, to leave the middle class out of a policy is to, frankly, leave opportunity just sitting on the table. It's going to require partnerships. The thing that the federal program did not do this past time was it didn't get states to the table. You can see states can do whatever they want. The federal government pours more money into Pell and the state, right? That's allowed. In fact, the federal government can increase the Pell Grant and an institution, a university, can say, that's nice, we can raise tuition now because you put more money into financial aid. That's not a partnership. We need a partnership. We need accountability. There is no sanction for an institution that does exactly what I just described. There's nothing to stop them from doubling or tripling their college costs over a period of 10 years. There's nothing to stop them from treating the poor kids worse than anybody else. There's nothing to stop them in the current system. President Obama, how many of you saw the president's announcement on Facebook or Vine or whatever? Okay. I hope you'll look at it because this January he got up and did something that no other president has ever done. He put the words college and free together in the same sentence. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Okay? We take public high school for granted. We even denigrate it. Do you know how privileged we are to have free public high school? People all over the world don't have access to free secondary education. It took us 80 years to get it. 80 years from the time that Horace Mann started talking about the importance of it to the time in which we got it. He just took the first step down that pathway. I think that it will work. Now, reasonable people can disagree over evidence. One thing I know for sure, nobody's ever done this in the United States, right? So we can't tell you about the evaluation of what it looked like last time. We can talk about, for example, the City University of New York, which in the early 1970s made a pretty radical decision to greet the civil rights movement with the throwing open of their doors. They lowered their tuition, they knocked it down to zero, and they said, we'll have no admissions criteria, everybody come on in. It was a really radical thing to do, and luckily there were a couple of scholars there who said, that's going to be interesting. And they put a study in place, and they tracked about 2,000 women for 30 years who came in through that program. And they compared those women to similar women who didn't come in during that time, but would have had similar, experiences in life. And they looked at them, and they looked at their children, and lo and behold, what did they see? College seems to have changed their lives. In fact, it changed the children's lives. CUNY did something pretty amazing. Unfortunately, CUNY didn't plan for that. So the faculty, of course, were given a load that they couldn't even believe, right? The classrooms were not prepared to hold these folks, right? The buildings kind of started to fall down, and you don't think today of the City University of New York as being the huge status symbol that it once was. And some people blame the opening access moment. I think that's really unfortunate. I think it was heroic. I think they changed lives. But it was one experiment. Instead, what we can learn we can learn from studies where we have reduced the costs of going to college. And we've done that in various types of research over time. We've looked at effects of financial aid. We've looked at the effects of reducing tuition. We've looked at the effects of what happens when governments suddenly start giving community colleges more money. You know what happens when government gives community colleges more money? Enrollment in for-profits goes down. All right? Think about who's going to oppose the community college movement. All right? I'm actually not going to go over this one right now just so I can make sure that we have time. But suffice it to say, there were two studies, one in Texas and one in Tennessee, that both seem to indicate reducing the costs of college going will not only get more people to enroll in college, but it will get more people to finish college. And really importantly, opening the community college does not mean that people don't get bachelor's degrees. They found increases in the fraction of people who also got bachelor's degrees because for many students, the two-year college is an entry point to that bachelor's degree. It's a lower cost way of getting started. Okay. I think other things could happen. If there's proper accountability in the system, we could stabilize the funding for higher education so that people wouldn't be wondering all the time what the costs would be from year to year. That's a really important thing that needs to happen. It may be possible to improve quality as well, because in the new system, we have an opportunity to design in things that say things like, be able to provide the following types of supports and learning environments to students. In other words, when the federal government is paying for something that big, they can stipulate what they want in return. States can as well. It's very hard to do what we're doing right now, which is to take the current federal financial aid system and go backwards and add in a bunch of extra things. Because people are saying, why would you start changing the system now? I don't have to have that. We have a good system. It's a whole other thing to essentially blow it up and start over again. There's a reason to start this conversation now. The first is it's going to take a long time to actually happen. It's a really important reason to sort of get the ball rolling. But as you can see from the charts that I showed you, we have a particular moment where people know that college matters and lots of them can't afford it, right? Across income brackets. That's a moment to bring people together around something that many of them, regardless of your background, regardless of where you live in the country, right? People are all sort of facing together. That's an opportunity. The current system does nothing to control college costs. So you should see what the consequences could be of doing nothing right now. The consequence of inaction is continuing to have rising college costs to the point that we are going to see more and more people unable to go. It's also going to really undermine our effort of K-12 education, well, what we tell students they're doing by getting ready. What are you getting ready for? What are you supposed to be learning more in high school to do as college becomes more and more out of reach? Right? I think a robust system that believes in a stronger K-12 education Universal early childhood education has to be complemented by some form of universal free public higher education as an option so that there's something to reach towards. The political strategy is not an easy one, but you should know that the first states to make community college free in this country, to even take steps towards it, were run by Republican governors. The state of Tennessee and the state of Mississippi went after this first. Okay? The president was not naive to this. He went to the state of Tennessee to praise the efforts of that Republican governor who was working down this pathway. This is something that business interests understand. The two-year college is something that really does have bipartisan support. We definitely have the budget to do this in the current system. There are many different ways to pay for this model, but one way is to simply allocate our current dollars. I showed you the numbers for the for-profit institutions. Might we stop doing that and use the money for something else? Okay. We could certainly do things through the tax code. There are other ways to do it, but I think that's the debate that we should be having. I think it's pretty clear that we need a change. The question of how we're going to pay for what we need is the part where we need lots of discussion about what's the best way to do that and what will make it sustainable. So that's the book that came out last year. I've got a book that hopefully will be out next year that describes those experiences of Wisconsin students starting in 2008, following them through now. And what I'm hoping is that by the time we write the next book on the next cohort of Wisconsin students, they will be in much better shape than the ones like Chloe and Ian and the others like them who are basically struggling just dreams of trying to get a college degree. And I welcome to your questions.
So we have a few things to think about, and we have a microphone that will go around. So if you just raise your hand, we'll make sure that you get a chance to ask your questions.
Hi. You talked a little bit about Scott Walker's budget plan in terms of education, and I know that there are some cuts to the Wisconsin system, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more specifically about how his new budget plan affects what you've been talking about.
That's not a small question. Well, I mean, I think the first thing just to say is that what he's doing and what he wants to do is actually quite similar to what governors in other states are doing. Right, so the first thing is this is not a Wisconsin problem. This is nationwide, right? And there's just a question right now about policy choices. There's a question about where we need to be investing our money, and there are folks concerned that the taxes are too high and they want to, cut that sort of thing. I think it's pretty likely that we're going to see several effects, right? One is I'm very concerned about the health of a number of our public institutions, right? I'm not sure UW-Milwaukee can survive. I'm really not. I'm not sure UW-Parkside can survive. They, for many reasons, are already operating with very little room to maneuver in terms of their budgets, and their students are needy. So I'm not sure they're going to be able to take in as many students as they once were in the past, and I'm not really sure where students in Milwaukee are supposed to go. They can't go there in the way that they've wanted to. I think it's pretty clear and pretty obvious that we're going to see students have a longer time to degree. Partly because there's faculty and staff layoffs as a result of this. They're not going to be able to get the classes that they need. He does have a tuition freeze in place. Let me say a word about that because it sounds good. Right, I mean, and I very much understand that from a student vantage point. In fact, there's part of me that also cheers the notion of a tuition freeze because obviously costs are, going up. But you have to remember that when the tuition's frozen, there's two problems. When tuition's frozen and the institution really doesn't have the revenue it needs to do the education, then the students will be in school longer. And paying for 5 years, right, even at that lower tuition number, is still going to cost more than paying for 4 years, right? Basically done there is said, I've frozen tuition, but passed the cost of it on to you, the student. The other part is, that tuition and fees they're less than 50% of the cost. The other costs are still going to go up. Books and supplies are still going to cost more. Living costs are still going to go up. And he didn't increase financial aid. So it really isn't actually a way to make college more affordable, even though it sounds good in a soundbite, right? And he's certainly, again, not alone in doing that. Things are not good, right? I do think, though, that institutions like the one that I sit at, it's going to be okay. To be honest, we have a lot more resources and we have a more diverse pool of resources on which to draw. And I think that this really does raise really important questions for the state about where we have to put our resources when we only have a little bit, right? What I said earlier about the most money going to the students who already are going to finish college, UW-Madison gets $14,000 a year per undergraduate from the state. UW-Milwaukee gets $5,000. I have concerns about that. I think that could be revisited even with the cuts. So, thank you for the question.
My question is regarding the reasons that the cost of college is rising. So, you know, with public institutions, it's clear that part of it is that states aren't putting in, but costs are also rising at private, not-for-profit institutions. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the reasoning behind that, and if there are ways to make that stop increasing, since the budget doesn't really impact it at the state level as much.
Right. Okay. So it's a really good question, and it's still, I don't want to say that all of the reason that it's rising in the public sector is just because the states are paying less. Some of it is about some of the reasons I'm going to talk about now. So just think about what you would do if you were running a business, and the more you charged, the more people came to your business. Right? For some reason, in higher education, the more we charge, the more people think we're offering something good. It's been going on for a very long time. Colleges and universities figured this out decades ago. Harvard actually was the first to really test the market. But it did it, and they found that the more they charged, the more the applications went up. There have been private colleges around the country that have actually done this, and they've actually found that they've increased their tuition by 1/3, and their applications went up. As long as people keep applying to really expensive schools, they will continue to charge a lot. That's the first part. But there are other reasons, right? Other reasons have to do with the race to appear pretty, right? We keep raising the stakes on what it is to be in college. If you hear a lot about college visits, right? I'm fascinated by the college counselors, the high school counselors who take you all to a campus visit. What are you looking at when you go there? What are you going to see that tells you it's good? You're going to see some buildings, right? You're going to go look at the gym. The facilities look nice. Oh, those residence halls are really nice. It's all optics. Maybe you visit a class, and maybe then you look to see if it's a small class with few students in it. Well, that's great, but all those things cost money. So what you've just seen are all the things the school is doing, right, that drive up costs. Very few students go to a school and say, that looks like, y'all are spending your money in the right way, right? Like nobody wants to stay at the Hilton anymore. They all want to stay at the Westin or the Kimpton or the whatever, boutique, right? This is a race, and it's being fed by the U.S. News and World Report. And frankly, UW-Madison wants in. And so do all of its peers. If you ask UW-Madison who its peers are, it's not the University of Iowa. It's Stanford and Harvard and places that have endowments, or huge endowments, right? So that's another part. Another thing is the whole question of what faculty do and our workload has changed. And we've begun to have sort of a cadre of upper administration, right, that manage lots of things. And there is some research that indicates that the growing number of positions in upper administration in universities is costing more and more money. It's a little hard. That research is a little tenuous to sort of say for a fact that that's the driver. But what we can say is that when students pay more money, it's not going to faculty. That's pretty clear. So something else is going on about where the money is going. And I'm not saying that to be defensive, to be quite honest with you. I mean, if it were going to faculty salaries, I would tell you, and I would also tell you that we're really worth it, right? But it's not going to faculty salaries, right? It's going in all sorts of other directions. Some of it might be well spent. Students today require services in some of these places that if you look at the number of students today who are coming to college depressed, we need mental health services. Okay, we really, really, really need them. And it should scare you that the largest real college in this country is Miami-Dade College. The largest college on the books is the University of Phoenix. Okay, Miami-Dade College doesn't have mental health services. 150,000 students, first-generation students from all walks of life, large numbers of homeless students, they don't have any mental health services. In some cases, we are dramatically underspending. That's the really scary part, right? Is if these college costs are where they are and we're not spending enough. So I think a lot of it's about allocation as well.
You mentioned that 25% of students go to schools kind of like Beloit where they're living residentially. Have you guys done any research on the disparities from students that are going to private schools that are non-for-profit and looked at kind of the advantages or disadvantages of going to a school like Beloit?
Yeah, so not yet. Most of our work at the Hope Lab has been in the public sector. 80% of undergraduates in Wisconsin go in the public sector. And we have a big study in the field right now where we actually have 4 ethnographers, which means 4 folks with PhDs who are trained to kind of watch students and, pick up on how they live and all that stuff. We have 4 of those in the field at 4 public universities right now. They're living there. They've been in the field for 9 months. They're going to be in there for another 9 months. Our next step is private institutions. And we're fascinated. And in fact, some of my students have been asking the question, what do they have there? What does it, and it's not so much Beloit, I mean, to be honest with you, right? They want to know, like, Yale, like, what's going on there? And what do they have that we don't have? And what are they, what does $60,000 a year per student buy you? Right? So I'm fascinated by the claims that are made by like Stanford, which has announced that, anybody under $120,000 a year, no loans. Yeah, but that's for 5 people. I mean, that's so easy. That's right? You got 5 low-income people on your campus. Congratulations. Okay, I have 100, but you know what I mean? It's real easy to fund those, right? If you were at the nation's community colleges, you try to offer something like that, you'll go bankrupt in 5 minutes, right? But we want to know. And I want to know what it is to be a Pell Grant recipient, right, on a campus with a very different income distribution and all of those resources. I think it's really important that we know, not just so that we can debunk any myths, but also so that we can replicate services, right? We don't know what's helping students to graduate at higher rates at those places, and maybe it's something that we could do in the public sector if only we had the money. So we're going to be going there next. We'll be looking for schools potentially to be at.
Dr. Rab, you talked a little bit about the accountability factors of schools, and I wondered if you've come across any models of colleges do a good job, or bringing in even another agency to look at how they distribute their resources in terms of accountability of their funds.
Accountability of the funds by the school. Honestly, no. I mean, mainly what the work has been about how states hold their public institutions accountable, but not so much about how an institution might bring in an outside organization to take a look at that sort of thing. I know there are large consulting groups that are making a lot of money, like Huron Consulting and others, that will be happy to take money from you to come in and look at your budget. But no, I haven't seen that sort of thing. I've wondered what the constituency is that will demand it. Right, whether it will eventually be parents of the students who are paying the tuition who will ask for that, or I often think about I have young children, and I think about the parents of other young children. If we're so worried about college costs, when are we going to start holding the schools accountable for their costs now, so that by the time we get there, right, they'll be reasonable. But these are challenging things. I mean, the parents of today's undergraduates are here today, gone tomorrow. right? They're doing this for 4 years or whatever, and then they're gone. So they're not necessarily the right group either. So it's also not clear who would do the hiring. And that matters, right, about who the report goes to.
Hi.
Hi.
To what extent is credential inflation and the devalorization of a bachelor's degree, to what extent is that a problem in terms of school availability and financial aid and whatnot?
It's a good question, right? So this is the question about quality. This is the question about what we're doing with the sheepskin. So there's still a sheepskin effect, right? It's still the case that having a bunch of credits doesn't get you what the diploma does. This is supposed to be handled by the accreditation system. Okay, you're not supposed to be able to get financial aid at your college or university unless you're an accredited institution. And there are accrediting bodies all around the country that are supposed to come in and make sure that things in college would promote actual learning. There's widespread agreement, bipartisan agreement, that the accreditation system is completely broken. We don't understand all the incentives that accreditors are facing, but for whatever reason, they are clearly accrediting institutions that are not doing a great job. That part has got to be fixed. The question of how to do that is sort of unknown. The one thing I'll say is, for all of the concern, with the exception of the for-profit sector, which I'll talk about in a moment, we're seeing robust returns to the degree. So either employers are paying even though students didn't learn anything, or they're happy with what they're getting, reasonably happy, okay, right? Now, there was just one of the first randomized studies where they looked at what's the return for the for-profit degree. And basically what they did was they created a set of resumes, and some of the people they put the for-profit college degree on, and other people they put a high school diploma. They got the same response from the jobs, from the employers. Okay? That's really upsetting news for all those people out there who are holding, right, degrees that they spent a lot of money for from those institutions. There are probably some good ones. I've been told DeVry is a good one. I don't know, right? But that's where we should be concerned, right? And that's yet another reason to deal with the sector. Yeah. Can we take a couple students? Yeah. Please.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to ask, like, you talked about how the system in affording college is tough for poor folk, middle-class folk, and even, in many cases, some, like, upper-middle-class folk. Like, how do you rally, like, all of them together? Because, like, a lot of time you hear sort of, like, the mudslinging, like, do this, like,
Yep.
middle-class folk, you know, can afford this. And so how do you rally that whole group together and say, like, you know, college isn't working for, like, all of us? Push change off that.
I think that's the big question right now, right? I mean, that's why I think it's time to move while the middle class is hurting, right? I mean, you got common cause, right, across a wide array of people. A lot of people will agree with you right now that this isn't working. So I think the United States Student Association is trying to do some of that, right? But I think that's going to have to be a much broader thing. I'm watching real closely to see what these presidential candidates are going to do. Curious which political party is going to make it part of their platform. Not just to invest more money in the Pell Grant, which is a good thing, right? We need the Pell Grant right now. I mean, whether or not it's working, whether or not it's fixing all of our problems, we don't want it to go away until we fix something new, right? By the way, that's the same thing, you know, where people are making common causes around debt, right? And everybody's out there saying student loans are bad and you can get all of that. There's a really dangerous part to that I want to mention. If we chastise the federal government for making student loans, right? If we tell them shame on you for making a profit off of student loans, if we tell them you shouldn't be making these Parent Plus loans available, right? Or whatever thing we're going to tell them, then we run the risk of them stopping doing it. Or we also run the risk of them starting to do credit checks for those loans. Two things happen, right? First, right now can't get anything else if there's a credit check on it, are really not going to be able to go to college. And we know who these folks are, right? This is a very, very big deal. And the federal government gets out of this business, then it goes right back to the banks. They were the ones who were doing it until 5 years ago. I don't think we want the banks being in charge of our access to credit for college. Okay, we were already doing that. It wasn't going so good. So trying to end student loans before we made college affordable is going to do real harm. We need them right now. It's the only way to pay for things. Where would you be without these loans? It's perfectly fine to say we don't want to have loans in the future, so we have to lower college costs, right? But until we've done that, we need them. And so we may need to make sure that we don't do real damage, right? And so I think the student loan conversation, though, it has managed to cross lines. And so we probably have to take some lessons from that. They've done it partly by dramatically oversimplifying the problem. That's a common tactic, right?
One more question? Wow.
Nobody has the last word. Mary will take the last word.
I just wanted to thank you for doing this. I really, truly enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to echo your thanks. Can we give a big round of...